yìí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
A ní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One name, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One name, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, I'm no kwa, Osinachi. One money, Osinachi, I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, mama, Osinachi.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, I'm no kwa, Osinachi. One money, Osinachi, I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, mama, Osinachi.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré. kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Àní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Namnukwa, Osinachi. One name, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Namnukwa, Osinachi. One name, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
I was just wondering where you brought us together and then you were missing in action?
Me?
Sorry. Yeah,
No.
I had to prepare my son for school. So that's why I'm so sorry.
No, that makes sense. It's good to see everyone. Paikide,
Yeah.
Hello, how are you?
Adeo,
Okay.
Adelio.
Wow.
Glad say you don't,
Okay.
glad say you don't lose weight. I be Tinubu don't catch you. I be like Buhari catch you.
I cut my hair,
You cut your hair.
Oh, what's happening?
Hello?
so I look different apparently. Alex, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, James. Good to see you, everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good morning,
JB.
Alex. Yes. Okay, so well, they said we're at liberty to start. So let's just let me quickly describe how this will go. I will introduce the panelists, and then we go one after the other from there, and we'll go in the order that is listed in the program. So we start with Dr. Five, followed by Dr. Yeku, and then followed by Dr. Verisimo, and then followed by the respondent by Ikede himself. And so that's the way we will basically go. And to have enough time to be able to do this, we should not have any break, one after the other. Let's just keep it moving like that. And so we still have 2 minutes on paper, but let's I think that we just give people a little more time to get in. Somebody's raising their hand. Oh, yes. Please go ahead and ask your question. Sorry, Jumoke, you're raising your hand. Are you asking a question?
Oh, okay. Sorry, my mouse clicked the raise hand.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought you were asking me a question. Okay, all right. So, yeah. 1 second. Let me just hand over the computer. Sorry about that. Okay. So, one it sends is first, shall we start? Athena, you're disturbing me now. I'm so sorry. That was my daughter. Okay, so I should first reflect on the ideas behind setting up this panel. It was born out of my reflections on the roles in public commentary in the past 2 decades. And part of it is my observation of how much the terrain has changed and the very significant ways it has happened. There was a time that, believe it or not, certain groups of people, epilogues, media houses, wielded the power to set social and moral agenda, and that today that power is very much contested and highly decentralized. And I can also speak to this because as a columnist for a newspaper for 15 years, I can put it to you that the facultative power, the pen that writers wield, has quite diluted across many other social and political actors. And there's so many reasons for this change, but we know that one central reason has been the internet technology. One of the resounding impacts of the internet penetration of African countries has actually been the democratization of opinion on various issues, especially the ones that have been traditionally been the purview of scholars and intellectuals. So now from politics to religion to science to journalism, literature and politics, the internet has produced a generation of critics who contribute to conversations about the interpretations of cultural experiences in all spheres, and often without recourse to academics and intellectuals who generate their own ideas from the ivory tower. And so this panel wants to engage this development by looking at how and why so many changes have occurred. And we are featuring 3 scholars who will take on one of the voices representing this emergent practice of online criticism. Ikede Ikelua, popularly called Pa Ikede, a public commentator, provocateur, polemicist, self-professed reader, a critic without a book, who has nevertheless contributed significantly to what constitutes the discourse of African literature in the 21st century. While not a formal or professional critic, some of his ideas about the death of a book as a material object that enables the African writer to maintain a privileged and elitist status and the birth of a new literary culture through the internet has turned out to be, in retrospect, prescient. While this development of non-formal and non-institutional contribution to academic debate is not exactly new, it deserves an analysis of the historical and cultural factors that have given birth to a realm of literary criticism and analysis, although primarily residing online. The panelists will engage the question of internet commentary, the rise of informal criticism, and social media as a generative site of informal yet productive opinion shaping. They will consider Ikeloa as a person and a personification of internet criticism and query what this shift portends in the age of hyper-democratized media access. I should also let you know that the choice of Paikide, as is known, is very instructive. In 2009, thereabout, I was in conversation with a poet and a very well-known critic, and then he mentioned about how that literature now, everybody's a literary critic, and then he specifically mentioned Ikide. He said somebody can just set up a blog and then be a critic. And at that time, I couldn't say much because Ikide was my friend, and I thought, yeah, what could be wrong with that? But now looking back, I realized that all the entire topography of exchanges and discourses have actually changed in so many ways. And you can look at it from journalism to even Pentecostalism. There is a live online, which needs to be reckoned with now. So yes, and that's part of the reasons to set up this panel. And the question is, okay, so much of the criticism is that there's a lot of chaff out there, but there are also gems. How do we separate both? What are the skills we need to separate both? And also, again, while I was setting up this panel, I got some pushback on what do you want to do, right? Like to over-elevate informal criticism or to level it up with formal criticism. And I think that the relationship between those who do these criticism formally and informally needs not be antagonistic. So how can we tap into the value of both? So there is no better forum to engage a critic who believes the days of books are over than a conference with actually a thing called decolonization. So without going into like extended definitions of what decolonization means, but we can look at how the knowledge building in traditional ways of traditional modern ways and opinion making are now ventilate each other. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our three panelists. First, we have Dr. Alexander Five, who received his PhD in comparative literature and African studies from the Pennsylvania State University in 2019. Prior to joining the University of Georgia in Atlanta, he taught at the American University of Beirut and the University of Edinburgh. And while his primary focus is modern African literature, he also teaches in the areas of post-colonial literatures, world literature, and critical theory. Dr. Five's research is concerned with relationships between politics and literary form in modern African literature. And then second, we will have, after him is Dr. James Yeku, who also got his PhD from English from the University of Saskatchewan. I practiced that. Joining, and now he's in the University of Kansas as an assistant professor. He's in the Department of African and African American Studies and the Institute for Digital Research in the Humanities. James studies the digital expressions of the literatures and cultures of African and the African diaspora and focuses on the African articulations of the digital cultural record. His interdisciplinary research explores areas such as cultural studies, social media in Africa, as well as online visual culture in Nigeria. And then finally, we'll have Dr. Jumoke Verisibo, whom everybody knows the way you know money. She's an assistant professor in the Department of English. She teaches and researches in the areas of creative writing, poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. Her scholarship as well extends to African literary criticism and literature, memory studies, traumatic affect, and research creation. Jumoke has published 2 poetry collections titled I Am Memory and The Bath of Illusion. She has a novel, A Small Silence, a children's book, Aduke and the Moon's Hidden Secret, which she also translated into Yoruba. She's co-editor with James Yeku of a collection of poems called Sorrows, on police brutality in Nigeria. So when our scholars are done, and if Pa Ikide is still breathing, then he will get a chance to respond. Thank you very much. Dr. Five, let's start with you.
Thanks so much, Adebola, and thank you for organizing this wonderful panel. It's great to see so many familiar faces, both online and in the room. And it's a real honor to be having a conversation with the man, the myth, the legend, Paikide himself, who is someone who I really think has been so influential on the way in which African writing, especially contemporary diasporic writing, is talked about today. So as some people may be aware, I published an article about Paikide's work in 2021 in the South Africa-based journal Social Dynamics. And that was a piece that really attempted to raise questions and come to terms with what Paikide's prolific and widely talked about online activity meant for what we might call established scholarly practice in African literary studies. This seemed to me at the time a kind of necessary intervention because Paikide's his own energetic interventions in the African literary conversation has come to occupy such a visible place in the field, right? Especially during the sort of mid to late 2010s and the early 2020s, right? In the midst of a broader surge of scholarly interest in digital African literary activity, Ikide's work seemed to me distinctive because it was not simply talked about by African literary scholars as a kind of new trend, right? But talked with, right? The very substance of his ideas being engaged with. Whether or not people agreed with his criticism of Nonviolent Bulawayo's Hitting Budapest, his excoriation of Fiston Mwanza Majila's Tram 83, or the anxieties he expressed about African diasporic writers being disconnected from the realities of the continent, academics nevertheless incorporated and engaged with his writings within their journal articles and monographs. It sometimes seemed to me as though Ikide came to act as a kind of conscience of the field, right? The sort of person one referred to if one was worried about the ethics of representation of Africa. And I think there's a kind of interesting thing happens there, right, where it might once have been Achebe's Image of Africa essay that was cited. It was now, or in addition, Ikide's 2013 piece on the Kane Prize. So my article was really prompted by a desire to better understand this relationship between the kind of online activity that Ikide was undertaking and what one might also, and I think very unsatisfactorily, call traditional criticism. I was concerned with how Ikide's work posed a kind of challenge to academic scholarship in the way that it both flirted with and distanced itself from established critical practice. And I was not really interested in fitting Ikide's online work into these categories, but rather asking what those categories can possibly look like in a future where online criticism becomes increasingly common and the meaning of terms like peer-reviewed and academic come increasingly under pressure. And so in doing that, I tried to make three related points. The first being that a notion of Achebean realist aesthetics underlies a lot of Ikide's criticism of contemporary African writing, right? That Ikide's self-styling as a, quote, reader who writes subtly and deliberately blurs the boundaries between kind of academic and non-academic scholarship, right? And that his work is really an example of how online scholarship can open up the field of African literary studies, right? And sort of take it away from the proverbial ivory tower. You know, I wrote this article, I think, in 2019, and in many ways, I would perhaps approach aspects of it differently. But today, I'm going to revisit that last point about Ikide's work opening up the field, sort of, you know, in a sense, revisiting what I said before and maybe putting a particular spin on it in relation to the theme of the current conference. In so doing, I really want to kind of move beyond the conservatism that is sometimes latent in academic discussions of online scholarship about African writing, right? This idea that it isn't peer-reviewed, so it doesn't count in the same way. And I want to think about how Ikide's work opens up that field in exciting new ways. And I think this opening up is already evident, as well as it having a kind of futurity to it, in the way that scholars writing in, again, quote unquote, traditional academic forms have begun to engage with his work. So I think the question of how to engage with Ikide, right, relates to the broader issue of the pressures brought by digital media upon, again, traditional modes of scholarship. And numerous scholars from a variety of fields have expressed reservations about the potential for online discussions to skew academic debate, right? And particularly common here is the quite conservative idea that social media platforms provide a potential mechanism by which people quote unquote outside of academia might undermine scholarly processes, particularly peer review, right? An incident such as the Hypatia affair a few years ago, and more recently the African Studies Review autoethnography incident, have shown how kind of online blow-ups have the capacity at least to call into question the peer review process, even without evidence of direct academic misconduct, right? This kind of concern has been raised about people who simply don't agree with an argument, creating a kind of Twitter storm, and that exerting enough pressure to undermine peer review. And it's worth noting that scholars closer to the field of African literary studies have also expressed concerns. Louis Chudesoke, for instance, notes that, quote, while new media outlets, techniques, and technologies may have democratized information and rendered knowledge accessible in ever more immediate ways, they've also diminished the value of professional, or at least skilled, intellectual labor. Research seems imperiled, as does the archive, precisely at the moment when we have greatest access to it. And the democratizing of opinion has led to a healthy suspicion of expert opinion, but also to a dangerous rejection of expertise. And he wrote that in 2016. James Yeku raises more specific issues concerning the often problematic nature of online interaction, arguing that, quote, we need to be alert to how the medium, that is the internet, stages anonymity, tenuous connections, as well as a culture of online trolling and shaming, a culture that seeks to silence and prescribe difference, even as it simultaneously enacts visible spaces for voice agency and self-representation. So, you know, the central thing at issue in these concerns is what's been called the instant response culture of the internet, and specifically the capacity of online reactions to generate considerable noise and the attendant power that such a movement has to shame individuals, sway opinion, or override the authority of established institutions. And I think this is a genuine possibility, right, in the context of African online criticism, where the speed with which readers of articles can react by using a built-in comment feature, by posting about them on social media sites, and writing responses on other blogs, means that forcefully made interventions can swiftly transform into all-out controversies. Ikeloa's Paikide's Tram 83 piece can serve as a good example here. Within 10 days of its publication online, the article had received numerous comments and was the subject of lengthy debate on Facebook involving well-known people such as Zukiswa Wana, Richard Odoku, Jean-Marie Jackson, Tsitsi Dangaremga, and many others. This controversy was then followed up by an article on brittle paper and in a further blog post by Paikide himself. While such controversies are often productive because they generate important debates, and I think this was an important point, right, about the representation of Africa in a contemporary Francophone novel. The speed with which they can occur and the often fraught nature of the online discussion have the potential to influence the terms of subsequent scholarly discourse. Despite these potential pitfalls, it seems to me essential that the field of African literary studies, kind of very broadly construed, continues to engage with online commentaries and to develop a sophisticated understanding of precisely how internet controversies shape our discourse. This, it seems to me, is an ethical obligation on the part of the field, one that is part of its mission to decolonize literary criticism and include a wide variety of readers and voices within the conversation around African literatures. And I'll say as an aside here, I think quite a lot of thought needs to be given in the future into how African literary studies and perhaps African studies more broadly sort of engages with online controversies, right? It just doesn't do to simply ignore them, right? That there's a kind of new opening up of the discourse here that needs, I think, some direct consideration. So in this regard, it's important to resist the conservatism latent in speculation over whether, to quote the scholar Michael Berube, that, quote, social media will become a venue for undermining traditional professional modes of scholarly communication, right? An issue should not be the potential undermining of scholarly norms, but rather the opportunity that is presented for rethinking and developing those norms on a more equitable basis. Just as Carly Kurtzia has argued that journal peer review systems need to be retooled in order to recognize wider varieties and protocols of scholarship, right, particularly those that occur in African universities, the critical voices with which scholars engage should hail not only from academic institutions. The task in such an engagement is to identify productive ways of interacting with such scholarship, ways that retain the specificity of academic work, yet also dialogically open up its ideas and methodologies to change. Right. And you know, I'm not really interested in prescribing any specific ways in which this kind of engagement should occur, but I want to simply identify some of the ways in which the field is already opening itself up to online voices by turning to two instances where Paikide has been cited in contemporary African literature scholarship. The first is in Amatoritsero Ede's research in African literature's essay called Narrative Moment and Self-Anthropologizing Discourse. As part of a discussion of the extent to which various African short stories and novels reproduce cliches of the Dark Continent through a process that he terms self-anthropologizing, Ede argues that Bulawayo's Hitting Budapest, quote, exemplifies the centrality of sensational rhetoric in strategic, exotic, self-anthropologizing texts. In the course argument, Ede leans heavily upon Paikide's arguments about the Kane Prize that was won by Bulawayo's story, and in so doing, gives the blogger's comments similar weight as one might a peer-reviewed source. The terms of this engagement are, however, actually quite novel. And here's a quotation from Ede's essay. The new African writer's self-anthropologizing is so formulaic that Ikeloa could easily predict the winner out of 5 shortlisted stories for 2011 ahead of the award announcement. And here he quotes Paikide saying that he can sort of already before the announcement predict that Hitting Budapest is going to win. And indeed, Novale Bulawayo did go on to win the 2011 Kane Prize. So here, Paikide's prediction of the winner of the 2011 Kane Prize is used to support Ede's argument that Bulawayo's story exhibits a particularly grievous self-anthropologizing tendency. What's interesting here is that the Paikide's prediction is not a kind of scholarly assessment, but a different kind of knowledge. It's a sort of provocative guess based on his estimation of the Kane Prize's preferred criteria and is written as part of his own withering assessment of the prize. This particular use of Ikide's work therefore constitutes an engagement with and a kind of reliance on a decidedly non-academic, again, that's a kind of problematic term, kind of knowledge. The informed speculation of the reader who writes that can only retrospectively be shown to be correct. That Paikide's knowledge production is cited and given credence within an essay that has been peer-reviewed and published in what is often considered to be the premier academic journal in the field of African literary studies suggests that a transformation of sorts has taken place. Right? Reliance upon these kinds of sources is, at least in some measure, acceptable. In terms of Ede's own argument about self-anthropologizing, his perhaps strategic citation of Paikide can be seen to modify and expand the terms of his own intervention. While his essay remains a peer-reviewed academic article, its validation of Paikide's prediction also means that it operates, at least in part, on the same discursive level as that of the online critic's prediction. Ede has therefore produced an essay that subtly expands the discursive range of African literary scholarship. Although this may have little impact on the immediate readers of the essay, I think it points to a quite telling change in the texture of academic scholarship that may prove more consequential as more and more people engage with online sources. An example of how to engage productively with the provocative and often unsubstantiated claims that can occur as part of online literary criticism can be seen in Madhu Krishnan's 2014 book, Contemporary African Literature in English, Global Locations, Postcolonial Identifications, where Paikide is cited on several occasions. As part of a discussion of the relations between political representation and aesthetic representation, Krishnan discusses different writers' approach to their role as representatives of African culture and society. Citing Chris Abani's refusal to accept that, quote, art may be cathartic or provide a moment of total closure in its representative function, Krishnan notes that Abani's own status is somewhat complicated by the fact that his claim to have been a political prisoner in Nigeria in the 1980s and 90s has been forcefully disputed by Paikide. In addition to making clear that these claims were made in a November 2011 blog, Krishnan goes on to situate them as the allegations that they are, writing that the claims indicate, quote, the level of unease and suspicion with which an attempt at a conscious separation of artistic representation and social representation is met. The truth of the allegations and the details of Abani's early biography, Krishnan writes, will likely never be known by anyone but the author himself. Nonetheless, the attacks against Abani illustrate the ways in which the demand for some level of verifiable proof of the author's status and therefore legitimacy as a representative of African conflict emerges as a central concern tied directly to the literary value of his work, end quote. So here, Paikide's comments are examined by Krishnan not because they provide any particular insight necessarily into Abani's past, but because they illustrate an important aspect of the value system that functions within contemporary African literature. Elsewhere, Krishnan certainly does treat Paikide as a critic and even refers to him as such, but the references to him generally occur as a secondary point to her argument, or in one instance in an extended footnote. In Krishnan's work, Paikide's critical contribution is acknowledged and engaged, but is so on its own terms in a manner that is conscious of his particular situation as an online critic. This act of situating, I would argue, does not minimize Paikide's voice, but maximizes it insofar as his interventions are engaged on their own terms and their specific value as online utterances comes to the fore. So just to kind of wrap up and tie this in a little bit with the theme of this year's LSA conference, I think it considerable decolonial implications to Akide's work insofar as its simultaneous legibility within a deconstruction of academic ways of reading prompts a questioning of how we do scholarship about African writing, where that scholarship is located, and who it is written by and for. And I think this way in which engagement with Akide's work involves a kind of stretching and a rethinking of existing scholarly practices is one of its kind of most powerful interventions, right? This is not merely the kind of musings of an informed reader, I want to suggest, but a highly distinctive way of doing African literary scholarship, the implications of which the field is still working through. Thank you very much.
Alex, if it's okay.
Abimbola had to leave. She'll be back because she has to quickly drop off her daughter. So I thank you so much, Alexander, for that presentation. We'll now move on to Dr. Yeku, and afterwards I will then present.
Yeah, thank you, Jumoke. I hope it's okay to do first name. Alex, very wonderful talk. I really, just nodded along in agreement with almost everything you said about Paikide, who for me remains a very, a very controversial figure. And I use controversial in such a way that I hope he finds quite complimentary, rather than, in an offensive way. But again, thanks for your talk. And I start on the note of controversy just to say that the question you want us to think about is one that I really, imagine is quite crucial at such a time as this. I've currently developed a book project that focuses on discussions of cancel culture online and literary controversies, scandals, and what have you, especially as animated by the literary commentariat, right? On places like Instagram and Twitter. And Paikide takes up a very central place in my analysis. And the reasons are probably quite obvious, some of which you alluded to earlier. But I'd like to start by also just saying I also have over the years appreciated, Paikide's constant call for social media as this new terrain of cultural productions that we ought to take more seriously. There are quite a number of people who are doing that important work, and I'm always very excited to be in conversation with that kind of work also. As far back as 2014, when I was wrapping up my dissertation in Saskatchewan, Paikide was one of the people on whose blog, Twitter feed I would always find myself just to make sense of what I was writing about in regard to Nigerian social media. So I also think his contribution is unparalleled. At the same time, I also think his contributions bear a major attribute of the medium itself. So I hope people will forgive me if I sound a bit, fragmentary. I don't have a prepared note, just trying to bring different ideas together. But when I said it bears a major attribute of the medium, I'm thinking about the ambiguity of the social media space itself. Now, social media is this very important terrain that has the capacity to amplify progressive voices, radical voices. At the same time, it also has this ability to depoliticize radical voices. And I think Paikide's work in some very interesting way reflect this tendency. If you look at his writings on Twitter and Facebook, you find a similar level of ambiguity. And I've tried over the years to wrestle with that ambiguity and try to understand what it does, especially for the kind of scholarly engagement people bring to it. So there's that ambiguity, like you call it ambivalence. It's you can't not take Ikeda seriously, but at the same time, you also do not want to essentialize his contributions, which I think is the others, the other extreme I find sometimes. But then I should go back to say that the title of this panel is "The Book is Dead," which is one of the most beloved talking points of Paikide. And just to offer that I do not think the book is dead. As a matter of fact, there are many scholars and a lot of people in the profession who share that sentiment that print culture is very well alive and kicking in the digital age. I mean, the level of digital inundation and saturation enough is one reason for people to find some kind of solace in print culture. So there's this tendency, and I think this goes back to the other extreme, to the Akkadian imaginary understanding of social media as this, over-determined, if you like, techno-pessimist narrative about, this idea that social media has come to save everything, and the book is dead. I obviously do not think so. And something else I think Paikide could do, therefore, is to insidious and plastic dimensions of social media. And I mean, the performance of literary celebrity by people like Chimamanda Adichie and the plasticity of all of those are things other people have examined. Yeah, I'm thinking about platform capitalism. As much as you get this idea that social media is now this new ecology of cultural productions, literary creativity. One thing I hardly find in some of the pronouncements I encounter in Paikide's writings is this idea of platform capitalism itself, the refusal to engage the capitalist foundations of the internet. And I think Paikide could be more frontal in terms of his engagement with social media from that perspective. But because I do not think that it's necessary to have this binarism between elite academic interpreters of African literature, or scholarly, interpreters, the so-called elite traditional scholars and online critics like Paikide. I do think the idea that we are not talking sufficiently about platform capitalism is also, as a matter of fact, also reflected among traditional, circles of literary criticism. Nobody seems to be very, particular about how the affordances of the digital become recruited to capture profits from, our interactions online. So it's not just a Paikide thing; it's both something you find very much in his work, but also as something that is reflected in among those of us who pay attention to social media. Something else I've been thinking about in recent times is the idea of cancel culture, like I said earlier. And I think we need to commend Pa Ikede's insistence on truth. Like you said earlier, Alex, it's about this voice of social conscience, as it were, in the field. But beyond that, I also think that we seem to be in a social media enabled age of offense, one in which grievances circulate so easily. And in that kind of context, you want to understand how calling out people, call out culture itself, something that goes all the way back to Black vernacular traditions in the US, how all of that become reconstituted online and, as a matter of fact, performed by people who call others to questions of truth. So yeah, for example, I'm thinking of the crusade to cancel Brito paper some years ago, when there was this entanglement with the El-Rufai government in Kaduna. And I found in particular that Paikide was central to some of the the tweet storm, if you like, or the Twitter storm of that particular period. And I mean, I thought Brito Paper's editorial interventions to unpublish that particular article that tackled the rape joke by El-Rufai's son was a missed opportunity to have an important conversation. But the way Pa Ikide went about this particular process was such that everybody, or well, most people who follow this conversation online thought Pa Ikide was basically, out to cancel Brito Paper. And for me, I thought that was not a fair accusation. So I went to Pa Ikide, in a backstage of performance, if you like, and basically asked him, what exactly is the intention here? You're out to cancel Brito Paper, or you're just holding this particular, you're just calling this leading platform of African literary, aesthetics to a higher standard. And I think Paikide did something that I found useful for my own thinking, which was to make a very important distinction between cancel culture as accountability culture and cancel culture as this unforgiving practice of social exclusion that is based on shaming and public ridicule. And this was from just talking on Twitter DM and trying to understand what the issue at that point was. What the issue at that point was. I don't think, though, to stay with the El-Rufai issue, then that it takes us back to the idea of unsubstantiated claims, right? Which for me is one of the things you find as part of this other side. So for me, what I'm tracking is just the various ambivalences of the online literary and cultural commentariat, right? This idea of making all unsubstantiated claims would be one reason why so-called snobbish and elitist scholars in the traditional sense will see the very important work people like Paikide are doing and perhaps want to ignore them. Definitely not people like Ama Ede, Madu, and some of us who have engaged with this work. But I do think, to go back to the El-Rufai case, that the claim about genocide, for instance, is something that that needs to figure into a conversation like this. There's been no genocide in the legal understanding of the term in the Kaduna context, and of course I'm thinking of the work of Chibo Otto and Yaduba in terms of the social and context specific definitions of genocide that go beyond the Eurocentric understanding of what a genocide is. Even through that understanding, we cannot, call what is happening in southern Kaduna and any kind of genocide. So a lot of these claims appear to me to be sometimes contrived rather than factual. And I think that ultimately comes back to undermine some of the solid interventions you find in Paikide's work. Something else that came up recently, and I was writing on Paikide and it took me somewhere else. So, and I want to go back to the Yinka Nwelu situation that came up recently in terms of, what it means to be a fake professor and what a social crusader on social media does or refuses to do at certain times. So I wrote this article about Onyeka Nwelu, the Nigerian writer who fronted himself as a professor of African studies in Oxford and got really, embedded in all of these controversial narratives about what it means to seek Western validation and to use, all these Western institutions for your own craft. And honestly, Nwelu is a solid and fine writer, but that politics is something else. So I was thinking about Ikide, and then the Nwelu issue came up, and the reason it came up was because Nwelu at some point had awarded Paikide this lifetime, literary award that was meant, like this panel does in some way, to recognize and in some way validate the kind of important work Ikide does online. And I thought to myself that the fakery that surrounds the discourse of fakery that surrounds, the Nwelu saga could have provided a self-reflexive opportunity for Paikide. And again, because I consider him to be some kind of senior friend, and in the Yoruba tradition of respecting your elder, I had to go back to use that metaphor from Goffman, to the backstage of this online performance to say, Paikide, I'm writing this article on Nwelu, and these are the entanglement I find between both of you and all of that. And of course, he offered a very neat and brilliant, explication of what his sense of things were. But then I still had to publish my article and just make the claim that Ikide could have been more self-reflexive of his encounters with Nwelu. And the reason I say this was because the Ikide that pursued Chris Abani, whom Madu cites in a work, was the kind of Ikide I expected would come up when would come up, openly to talk about this award he had received from the James Corey Society, just for us to be able to not give occasion for the important work we do online to become ignored because of some kind of selective interventions in the online space. So I say all of these just to say that I find Ikide to be very important. I think nobody doing African literary studies at the moment will be taken seriously. They're not taking Ikide seriously, if that makes sense. On the other hand, I do think that there is a need for an understanding of the ambivalent position the online critic, himself, this online position he occupies. To wrap up with this recent work of John Gillory, professing criticism, I think of Ikide when I look at Gillory's new work in terms of who has a power to profess African literary criticism, the role of digital media in that, and as a matter of fact, how all of those perhaps also lead to these assumptions about the death of the English department itself, and what that means in the context of African literary studies. So those are the ideas I wanted to share, and I'll just leave it at that to save some time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yeku. And then now we go straight to Dr. Verissimo, and we go from there.
Thanks so much, Abimbola and James, for thanks, Bimbo, for organizing this. Sorry, please. Thanks. I was just making sure that she gets to school. So my presentation is titled "The Erotism of a Public Commentator." I think I'll try to type in the title, or how I write the erotism, which is derived from the word error and erotic, actually. So in this response to Abimbala's proposal for this roundtable, I will reflect on Ihide as an embodiment of internet criticism and go on to query the implications of the work it does for African literary studies. My response would contain an acknowledgement, a concern, and a query to illustrate the importance of his influence on the digital landscape of African literature. I would like to share a personal story. A few years ago, my publisher wanted to know what kind of relationship I had with Ihide online. If I remember correctly, she said, she asked if we were good. At the time, she was shopping for blurbs for my novel, A Small Silence, but I did not immediately tie a question to our intention to approach Ihide to blurb my book until I saw his commendations. It then occurred to me why my publisher needed to ask the question at the time. I have since found myself revisiting her question regarding my online relationship with Ihide as I tried to understand the significance for my publisher, who is in the business of selling books, and was already considering what it would mean not to be in Ihide's good book, or in the context of today's discussion, on the good side of his internet. My deduction from my publisher's question is to suppose that Ihide's role as a commentator on the internet shapes the perception and perhaps the reception of authors and their books in his role as an online critic. It did not matter that he has not published a book, which would qualify him as a writer in the traditional sense, nor is he a professional or traditional reader, as he's not a scholar of literature in the academic sense. Before the publication of my novel, I had in the past received admiration for my work from Ihide, and I didn't particularly consider what it would mean if he didn't like my book. Over the years, I must say that I have admired the consistency of his critical practice. I understand quite well the basis for my publisher's question, or one might say our concerns. A few African authors have had their fair share of Ihide's critique of their works, which at times appears to move away from the aesthetics and value of the work to what reads like contentious accusations that point to the self-serving purpose of what he claims are not African-focused preoccupations. Some of these things have been discussed by Alex and James, so I'm not going to repeat them, and the names are the same name. So I have sometimes wondered if it is the writing or the internet that projects this way of seeing Ihide as contentious in his approach. Yet Ihide's role as a critic outside of academia is not new. In the West, for instance, the book that James Yeku mentioned, Glory's, made reference to the professing criticism, has talked about the emergent scholar critic and its subsequent transformation into a field of study, where there is, which resulted in the need for standardization, which is why we have the Department of English. What is new, however, is both this platform and the approach that Ihide used for engaging his objects, which I will go on to discuss later. In the Nigerian context, a more recent influence of non-academic reader is the newspaper. Before the emergence of the internet, we've always had like academic reviewers who come up to write reviews or engage book. Actually, the Guardian newspaper, for instance, after so many years, resulted in the publication of a book that has essays that have remained reference point for many scholars in the English department. So one would say that he is not what he's doing is not new. Perhaps the question is how he is doing it. I read Alex's work, so one would say that he has created enough ruckus on the internet to benefit from the attention of some of the panelists. James as well has written on Ihide, and Alex did mention that he has written on him. Afam has written. Amata Serra has written on him. Quite a number of people, a number of scholars have continued to reference his works. The articles from these scholars always point to the agency of Ikide's internet influence, particularly in relation to African literary studies. In most cases, while one may not agree with Ikide's comment on the internet, we can't deny that they draw the attention of readers, which in essence makes a case for rethinking the relationship of academia with the public, or one may say a consideration for evaluating the roots of the department for standardization. That said, as you would have guessed from the title of my talk, the word eroticism brings together two words, erotic and error. The erotic, beyond an immediate suggestion of the sensual, invites ideas of curiosity, vitality, and spontaneity, which, as you would agree, are qualities that describe the experience of influencing on the internet, particularly on social media, where social capital is quoted for sustained relevance. The word error, on the other hand, as defined as I use the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, is an act that through ignorance, deficiency, or accident, departs from or fails to achieve what should be done. The idea of the erotic, which is the word that I coined, that is formed from these two words is an attempt to draw attention to the potentialities of the power of the internet and its ability to generate a plethora of emotions that can create several levels of errors of judgment. I mean, James did cite some of these errors of judgment, and I think Alex made references to them as well. Yet, I need to this context of this titling in discussing the focus of this roundtable, which is to take a closer look at Ikide as a person and personification of internet criticism. Like Abimbola referred to him in the proposal, which she read earlier, as a public commentator. And I have seen the same reference used in the work in the other, that from a public intellectual, which perhaps is an attempt to draw attention to his preferred platform, perhaps, which is the internet, the idea of commenting, or an attempt to capture the ongoing advocacy that belies what he is commenting on. A quick note on commentators. In the case of the internet, the term commentators would refer to those who typically attempt to provide new insights for a new idea, which is framed around their political and social context, and who usually attempt to periodize their object to suit their advocacy. The word here is advocacy, and in Ikide's case, he has consistently made a case for the death of the book to capture the declining importance of the book as a material object. His argument regarding this advocacy is that it democratizes knowledge and shifts the elitist privilege of the African writer. First, in what ways one would define the idea of the African writer as elitist within the framework of a global publishing industry? I'm a writer myself, and I do not think that captures my experience here. Secondly, one may argue that the call for the end of the book serves as a means for Ikide to sustain his digital relevance and carve out a niche for himself in a domain where he was previously excluded. I assume that Ikide's efforts and advocacy for the dominant use of the internet, and maybe his frustrations and difficulty in assessing.
Please, you need to hold on a bit for us. We're having issues with our network, with our speaker rather. Thank you.
Sorry,
I did hear that
I have internet. Yeah, maybe go a little slowly. They said they have their internet is not, their reception is not that good.
Okay. So I think I was saying that one may argue that the call for the end of the book serves Ikide to sustain his digital relevance and carve a niche for himself in a domain where he was previously excluded. My assumption is that Ikide's efforts and advocacy for the death of the book emerged from his experience as a predominant user of the internet, and maybe his frustrations and difficulty in accessing some of the books he would want to read on the continent. The other idea of naming himself a reader who writes and not a critic seems like a slight on the academic, whom he never fails to chide in a social media post. For Ikide, the task of framing and naming the work he does with continued emphasis is an attempt to make sense of the function of his work for the literary community. The creation of an internet identity itself, as per, gives the sense of a sage, which creates in the mind of the online readers a verse individual who should be listened to and to whose knowledge should be acknowledged. In the creation of this identity, or in owning this identity rather, he projects his perspectives on literature and politics in a combat-ready tone, in which what could be a conversation with him usually turns into a dismissal of the ideas of others whose perspectives are not aligned with his. On his blog, actually, he describes himself as father, fighter, lover, and troublemaker, which itself projects the style of his criticism to the reader. Even so, this self-label, which shapes him as someone who does not care whose ox is God, does not diminish his role in introducing new readers to African writers or writers across the globe, an opportunity not readily available to the traditional critic, who are ensconced in producing criticism in the academic language required by academic journals and reaching very few readers. The growth of the mobile phone, particularly I'm using in the Nigerian context here, and increasing access to the internet have created readers whose encounter with books or news on books is mostly a subjective experience, modulated by opinions from the likes of Ikide. In his interview with Bridle Paper, which was published as far back as 2013, he talks about reading a lot of books. He talks about reading a lot of books since childhood without the distraction. When he's asked about the idea of the erotic in novels, he makes a claim for the book as anachronistic and goes on to express that in the 21st century, quote, I'm quoting him here, in the 21st century, the book is a wretched barometer of African writing. You will need to go to the two most important novels, Twitter and Facebook, in addition to blogs and websites, to get a really good read on these issues, including notions of sexuality and sensuality. End of quote. In his interview with Emmanuel Iduma, where he claims that the book is dying a slow death. And Iduma shows his hesitation at the beginning of the interview by projecting that perhaps Ihide might be the true digital native, the tireless literary wanderer who may be relying too much on an unanthologized social media. But then again, is why, in retrospect, we might consider him a forerunner in a new mode of responding to our literature. Perhaps this is true. The question to ask is, was Ihide's mode of responding to our literature sustainable, especially when we think about the social media? With the transition from the likes of WordPress, blogs to focusing on microblogging sites like Twitter and the aging status of Facebook, can we indeed consider the internet, the social media, as a new mode of responding to our literature? Is it sustainable? We've had social media, other like Diggs. There was a time we had MySpace that have also transitioned. They evolve and change. So this is a phase. That's what I'm just saying, that perhaps this is a phase. And what does it mean for the literature, for depending on it as a place of recording our own, the critical work that we do? My main concern with regards to the idea of democratization of the critic, I'm going to jump that because I think Alex and James did talk about that. Alex mentioned the possibility of the online critics to use his word, screen the work of scholars on the internet. And James did mention the inability of Ihide to engage with the capitalist potential of social media. So I guess we are practically saying the same thing. So I'm going to move away from that part. So evidently the things have changed from clicking likes on Facebook and sharing photos among friends to become to a place where the social media has become a strong voice for advocacy campaigns that generate millions of supporters. The role of the social media influencer is slowly becoming a profession. TikTok, for example, has become a very relevant platform for book recommendations. Writers are finding more visibility on Instagram, even as Twitter serves a place for backlashing authors and offering instant feedback on links to articles readers do not like or have been urged to dislike. The point I'm making is literature is no longer business as usual, as there is urgency, which is influenced by the shape of the internet. And I believe this is close to the idea of the erotic in its ability to stimulate, especially if the influencer is skilled and intent on staying relevant. My point of relevance is that the call for the death of the book seems to be the point from which it either makes its relevance consistent. And then, of course, there's also the latent power of the internet, in which the unrecognized feeling of the reader is manipulated and led to react by following opinions whose intentions are sometimes not well, and most times not well tested. Ihide, for instance, in his interview with Bokwa, considers himself genetically wired to express himself, to have strong opinions. The concern pertains to whether he will refrain from succumbing to a state of intoxication with power when engaging with individuals on the internet by instigating the attack, or maybe the word is not instigating, by stimulating the attack of those whom he may have, whose ideas he may not favor. Sometimes mentioning the names of particular writers, which appear as projecting truth based on his claim that they are influenced by the West or that they are morally compromised in their nation state, sometimes opens these writers to trolls on the internet. Again, this sense of eroticism is again a way of stimulating controversy to create relevance. Again, Ihide claims that he's taken too seriously by his followers. Yet the idea of the death of the book is not what these platforms, but again, the idea of the book, which he propagates, is not what these platforms project. Rather, they are asking for a new way of reading or thinking beyond academia, an engagement with writers outside of the physical reading space, and a questioning of how the digital platform may serve as centers for raising questions about the function of literature in the African society. So I'm going to move on to
sorry, Jumoke, you have to. Yeah, I'm
going to round up right now. Finally, it is, I would say that the Ihide's work is not significant in his considering the extent of what he has done. My query is rather that the idea of what functions is propagation of the idea of the demise of the book serves to the African literary studies. Google, for instance, has continued a project of digitalizing book, which seems more sustainable rather than the use of the internet, which it continues to suggest as the platform from which books can grow in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Verissimo. So Paikide, you have 15 minutes, and I plead with you 15 minutes. No, it's even a lot. Let's say 10 minutes, because people will want to ask you questions. So please take 10 minutes to answer. I know you have a lot of things to say. I know you want to answer for all the critics that are online, but please keep it to 10 minutes so that people can engage you from, the audience too. Thank you.
I'm going to surprise you by keeping it to less than 10 minutes. First of all, I want to thank every one of you. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to every one of you. It was very engaging, even when you didn't agree with me, and I'll come at you guys later. But it was very engaging. Probably one of the most disciplined spaces I have been in. I'm really glad that I'm here. The only reason I want to say that I agreed to this panel was I thought I was getting an air ticket to Lagos. It turns out that it was a virtual meeting. So I forgive you, Adoni. Hopefully next time you will send me a ticket to Lagos. It's very interesting listening to everybody. The journey didn't start yesterday. I've been basically internet since the early 90s during the pro-democracy struggle. And ironically, a lot of the people that have concerns about my work on the internet are people who by themselves have led the push for organic narrative on the internet. Their leadership has been really instrumental in giving voice to a lot of people who otherwise would have no voices. And so every one of them is actually on this panel today. So I remember talking about boundaries and talking about, who's an online critic and so on and so forth. I remember about 20 years ago, we were going. I was at a conference where I work, and somebody was giving, believe it or not, was giving a presentation on the internet. And he said this thing about how excited he was when he was asked to come and give a presentation on the internet. And when he told his son, he says, "I'm going to give a presentation, son." And he says, "Great, about what?" He says, "About the internet." And the son said, "Why?" And he was embarrassed. Like, "What do you mean, why?" He says, "Well, the internet is like the fridge. Why stop at the internet? Just go to make a presentation on the fridge. Here, I'm opening the fridge, I'm closing the fridge." That's the same thing, the same way I see the way we talk about the internet and social media in 2023, as if it is some strange thing. It's just another medium. And I want to apologize openly. When I talk about the book dying, I'm not talking about the ideas in the book. I'm talking about the book as a medium, as opposed to the internet, social media as a medium. When I see the book and the beautiful ideas that are in it, I remember beautiful songs of my childhood, Simon and Garfunkel, still trapped in the cassettes of my childhood. Who does that? You just don't wake up this morning and say, "Well, I'm going to put on a cassette and play music." So that's one issue. I was raised by books, so to my dying day, I will always revere the books of my childhood. Everybody knows I won't have, if I make a statement or two without achieving it, then it's not Paikide. So I was raised by the writers of the African Writers series, and so I respect books. There is no doubt. But when I say I respect books, I am talking about the books, the ideas that are in the books. Now, this is where this is very important. As a child, my parents could afford books. My parents could afford magazines. They could afford even journals if they wanted to. And so children of my generation would cry if they did not have access to books, the way children of this generation would cry if they did not have access to what? The smartphone. So that's how I see it. Today, if I send my niece, say $15,000, 15,000 Naira, and ask my niece to buy a book, she will say, "Yeah, sure, Daddy." But guess what? Chances are she's not going to buy the book. The books have been priced out of the reach of most young Africans. And somebody said to me the other day, and this is often said, that young Africans are not reading. That's not true. Young Africans today are reading a lot more than my generation ever read. They are just not reading books. And so I have said to all of you who write these things, come and meet young Africans where they are. They are writing, they are reading, and they are writing on the internet. It's free for them, for the most part. All they need is a smartphone, and they're there. I call it a failure of leadership. We have to make sure that we meet our young readers where they are. That's one. The second thing is what gets lost in the translation. I have said over time that because we don't have the publishing infrastructure, a robust publishing infrastructure in Africa, We are forced to squeeze our narrative in alien vehicles. As a result of that, things get lost. We have made a lot of progress. There was a time when people would explain what egusi was, what ogbono was, and I would say, what are you doing? Don't they have Google? When I was growing up as a young man, I had no idea what crumpets meant. Nobody explained it to me. I went to the dictionary and figured it out. All of that is changing. We must give ourselves credit for doing a lot of this stuff. And so there's a lot of conversation about my style. I needed to do what I needed to do. I needed to go frontal with folks to say, we are going to hold ourselves accountable. We must not write just for ourselves. We must write for everybody else. We must also be ethical in what we are doing. I don't care about what the definition of genocide is. In the West, if you kill one dog, you are in big trouble. We kill, our leaders slaughtered 1,000 Nigerians, and African writers went to that same, to those same leaders to get money to fund their literary jamborees. That's beyond unethical, that's criminal. And here we are having a conversation about whether that falls under the definition of genocide. What happened to us? Those are the kinds of things that trigger me, that get me really upset. So that's the other thing. So there's got to be an alignment between where the writers are and where the readers are. I'd say to you that things are improving, but African writers have been raised to be risk averse. African intellectuals have been raised to be risk averse. They have locked themselves up behind paywalls, paywall journals. They write books that nobody can afford, and they speak in a language that very few people understand. We must change that, and a lot of that is changing. The mere fact that we are here today shows to me that that we are changing. Now, I said I would be brief. A couple of things. I have been very consistent in my need to hold all of us accountable, including myself. I went to Oxford. It was the University of Oxford that paid my way to Oxford. It was not Onyeka Nwelwe that gave me the award. It was the James Corey Society and the African Literary Society and the University of Oxford. Not that it matters. As I speak to you, I am in my office. I really don't define myself as, I don't define myself as the kind of person that people define me. People have defined me, including the power. I was not the one that gave myself the power. The person that gave me the power is right here staring at me. So you guys have to go sort yourselves out. Whoever, I thought of myself as a young man, and the young lady said, "You're an old man, Pa," and it didn't stop. Unfortunately, I don't like it, but now I am stuck with the title Pa Ikide. You all have to go to Adunia and ask her how that happened. Nwelwe is basically, Onyeka is literally like my child. The experience with Onyeka showed to me one thing about us, that we are not very familiar with the whole notion of mental health wellness issues. I am very familiar with his situation, and there is an essay coming that I will write that talks about his situation. His situation is totally different from that of Chris Abani. There is nowhere in the history of our narrative where Onyeka distorted literature. Nowhere. It was only in that manifestation of his illness where he allowed himself to be called a professor. I have very personal an intimate experience with his situation, and that was why I was quiet, not because I was afraid of confronting him. Now, again, Is the book dead? The book as a medium, I think, is dead or dying. But more important than that, I plead with all of you brilliant readers, brilliant writers, to consider the fact that all of our young African readers are reading inappropriate content on the internet simply because you guys are writing appropriate content in the wrong spaces. And I see us coming together, beginning with this conversation, to think about it in that respect. People are reading, and you can make money from it. I'm too old to be making money from that stuff. And by the way, I have spent over 4 decades in the United States running some of the most sophisticated systems in the world. I really see I'm prouder of that work than I am of what I have been doing on my smartphone, and which all of you call scholarship. I'm flattered by it. I stay in the night and in the darkness of the night, and I'm writing essays on my smartphone. And then Alexandra comes out with a big fat essay and says, this is Paikide's works. And when I try to download it, it says I should pay $45. I had to beg him to get me a free copy before. I can afford those, but the hundreds of thousands of people that call me back cannot afford it. That's my point. Now I'm done. Questions?
Thank you very much, Pa. I was expecting, they really took out your breath, so I'm glad how it went. Okay, so we have some comments, and we have a question from Mohammed Shakir Balogun, and so I'll read them to you, or you can read them yourself. And then we also ask the people that are in the audience to ask their question. And so this is from Jacqueline Bethel Mogue. It says that it seems that social media platforms are more than about discussion and also entail very real life consequences. How do we balance online discussion and debate with real life impact, targeted individuals like book sales, the loss of employment, or if a graduate student, the loss of a future academic career? And then the question from Mohammed Balogun says that, Ikide, do you include Kindle books and other electronic formats of the book, which are usually cheaper than hard copy books, in your idea of what people should read on their phones and tablets as distinct from hard copy books? Thank you. So.
Yes, for Mohammed, yes. I think that the Kindle books and the other electronic formats are a great start in blurring the boundaries amongst the various media that we have out there. So yeah, but they are still expensive. Depending on where you are on Amazon, it could be free, it could be $1.99, it could be $5.99, it could be $8.99, but it's a lot cheaper than the hard copy book. And then the issue, of course, is access into those what some of my friends will call capitalist spaces. I personally paid the subscription for several young people for journals like the New Yorker, even magazines like New York Times. So we still have a long way to go. But yeah, absolutely. I think that Kindle is a great start. I have a lot of books on Kindle, and the reason I like it is I can do research across books. I can do copy and paste. I can do anything I want, whereas I couldn't do the same with a hard copy book.
Okay.
In terms of the nature of conversations on Twitter space, and this is also a self-criticism, I think we have a right to model the appropriate behavior on the internet. And also that includes ethical behavior. You can't go to somebody who has just murdered 1,000 people, take money from them, and then expect me to be quiet, or expect somebody to be quiet. That's just not inappropriate. We have to model the right behavior, and I think a lot of that is happening. A lot of folks, including many on this panel, are highly respected leaders on the social media space, and the way they carry themselves informs the way their followers carry themselves.
Okay, there is a question online, but before I ask that, I should like to ask, and any of the panelists can respond. And this came to me listening to Dr. Fife and Dr. Yeku, about the idea of the fact that what we call peer review in writing now has changed, a lot with the internet.
Yeah.
And also to look at what Dr. Yeku said about the polemical nature of the internet itself, not how it impacts criticism. And the question now that I want to know is that, so who is the peer of the online critic? Who is the peer that reviews the online critic, right? So you just talked about ethics now by Kide, but again, it's also like, to use the formal term, who are those that you will consider your peer reviewer in this, in this new ecology?
So that's actually a great question. We have been reviewing books from the beginning of time. It's just that we were doing them in beer parlors, and there was no social media. Nobody was hearing us. When I was in my 20s, we would get Ngugi's books, we would get Achebe's books, and we would sit on cartons of Gouda and read and review them back to ourselves. And so there was nothing new I was doing. The only thing that was new was that I now had access to people. I was now reading loudly. You understand? So I would say that I listened very carefully to my followers, and to even including those who are quiet, what the feedback is, and they're often very honest. I would say this: we are in transition. We are moving from the godlike, deity-like behavior of the Shoinkas and the Achebes and the Ngugis to now where sometimes we can hardly tell the difference between the reader and the writer. So there is that what you have called the democratization of narrative of writing, has also meant the democratization of deification, if that makes sense. The reader and the writers are now suddenly very in the same space. And so it's a return to the traditional ways of our ancestors, that call and response in the market space, where you don't know the reader and you don't know the writer, or the reader doesn't know that he or she is a writer also, you see. So the book is not able to give you that three-dimensional look that our ancestors used to have in the playground. Social media does that.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we go on, we have questions from the floor. So we will take questions from those who are attending in person, those who probably look forward to meeting Ikide in person. So please, if you can redirect, just ask your questions, we can hear you, and then we'll come back into the virtual room.
Continue. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me. My name is Dr. Mujida. I came in late, so I'm not actually very sure about that, because my comment on the issue of the truth that is the two reasons. The first thing is I want to talk about that the book that I that a physical book that we carry around and that we read. But people still read other formats, which I think you are discussing about. We read as e-books, as audio books, some people read as VR. But I think the book isn't dead because of a comment I heard recently at London Book Fair. Some people still carry the book around as a dress accessory. Some carry it around as like their business card. They just must publish the book. So if we're talking about the book is dead as in the readership of the book, yes, but people still publish books because they just want to have that feeling that I have this book on me. And so we can look at the book is dead in those two formats. One is people still want to carry a hard copy, maybe for their accessory, or maybe because as a business card, but for the readership of the book, it has been adapted. It has moved from the way it was before into various other forms of adaptation, audio books, e-books, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank
So
you very much.
I would agree with you. So this is a book. This is a book I just got. I actually got. Can you see this? I got two copies of them. I don't know why. From Amazon. I must have clicked the thing twice and gotten a copy. It's How to Write About Africa: Collected Works of the late great Biavanga Wainaina. So a secret about me: I collect all my books digitally. I also like to have a hard copy with me. When I talk about the book, I'm talking about the medium. I'm not talking about the ideas in the book.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, my name is Mercy. I want to thank everyone. Okay, this is very personal to me because I'm a blogger and I also work in the media department in my state, in the state government. There's something I wanted to be sure. I know you mentioned it, but I just want some more detail. Is it actually the book per se that, like you already said, the idea in the book, they're still alive, they're still much alive, even though the reading culture, it's no longer them. So how do we now preserve that culture? Because I honestly believe that the reading culture is also dying. Now, take for instance, we have all of this information. Literally everything you want to learn, you can find online, right? And I have a lot of friends who tell me that, I can't read though, I cannot just read though. What do I want? I can Google, right? But I discovered that most of the information on Google, it's not detailed, just like you getting bits and little information, and then you're just satisfied with that. But if we really want to make any sustainable lasting impact, then we need the detail. And I still believe that those details are only still in the book, even though we have e-copies of this book, which not everybody is used to. Right? For instance, I have a blog and I put in very inspiring content on my blog. And sometimes people call me and say they were searching for a particular subject, and then my content come up. So most of the people tell me that I got this information online. I'm not always very impressed because I know that I am part of the people who put those data online. And I know a lot of people who do the same thing, but we are not entirely detailed in what we put there, right? So how do we now build, how do we maintain that reading culture so that young people are not just satisfied with getting these little pieces and then they are done, when there's so much more in the books?
That's a good question. Critic can answer. Any of the panelists can answer.
Let me quickly say that things are improving. We are getting a lot of writers and intellectuals who are highly respected on social media, on the internet, and and at least three or four of them are here. When they write something, when they send a link, when they put a link on their tweet Twitter account, for instance, people are more likely to click on those links and go to that content. That means that the really astute writers are beginning to figure out how the readers read and are flowing with it. But we could do a lot more, clearly. And that's been one of my quiet passions, to encourage reading of good content in the way today's readers like them.
Okay, so we have a few questions online. Jumoke, do you want to unmute and to read your question now?
Oh, okay. Yeah. The part did mention something about the smartphone creating availability of knowledge. But I mean, I'm thinking about how that itself is like a societal stratification, and it opens up the potentialities of the class structure, the differences, because it's not as affordable as you'd say to access information on the internet I would need data if I were in Nigeria, and that costs a lot of money. I mean, 1,000 naira, for instance, would not even get me enough data to read a book to the end. Okay, so I'm trying to think about how that actually captures this knowledge democratization, which you say becomes possible with a smartphone.
And Paikide, we have only 3 minutes to go. So let me just ask one more question. You can answer the 2, and then we'll be able to round up. And that is, this is coming from Jumoke's presentation. And mine is that, how long do you think that you as an internet critic now, before the structures, the very traditional structures you are seeking to subvert, how long do you think before it absorbs your work? That's those 2 questions. So.
Well, I'm going to be around for a long time. I'm 28 years old. So, don't kill me before my time. And I don't really, and I probably blame myself for the way I'm looked at, maybe because of my tone and my attitude. I don't really see myself as subverting anything. I really see myself as a cheerleader of the great works that all of you guys are doing. I'm being serious. When I don't know, when you came to this country many years ago, you had a book. You understand? But we're no longer talking about that book. We are talking about you and your body of works, and it goes beyond the book. And my thing is just the politics of it. We must make sure that when we look at you, that we are looking at the universe of your work, your advocacy. You should not just be defined by one book. You should be defined by everything you have done. And I think to the extent that we've been doing that, I think we have been very successful. There are, in terms of what Jumoke said, that there are, I would say that there are millions of young Africans on social media. I don't know how they are doing it all, but they are there. Sometimes if I'm not there in a week, they will call. All these things, what are you doing? Where are you? Are you dead? I'm not dead, I'm here. Somehow they find the data. They find the data to talk to us. So, it could be they are going to some cafe somewhere and, getting free Wi-Fi or whatever it is they're doing. Or maybe they are all in Ewu, my village, where Wi-Fi is free, as you know, and doing all of this stuff. But we must continue to push the envelope. Is everything rosy? No, we are living in very exciting times. We really are. And the other thing, people always say that I have never written a book. That's not true. Go and do your research, and you will find that I have contributed to some very, very important books. I just humor people. I write something and say, "Oh, that's nice. Put it in a book." I have also written in journals. I have participated in every medium that is available, including dancing on the internet. So I don't know what else you guys want me to do. I am just saying that we must respect where Africans are, and we must make sure that the narrative is organic, and it already is. White folks come to our spaces and they start Googling things. What is this? What is that? Because they are really interested in us, just as we were interested in them. And now they no longer ask me. At work, I go, when I text my colleagues, I go, no wahala. Nobody ever asks me what wahala is anymore. I just know wahala. What's wrong with that? They now know it's no worries. And sometimes they want to impress me. They bring something they saw on the internet and they say it. So it's all good from my perspective. I really am happy where we are. It's been at the expense of my personal dignity, but I wear that with a badge that many African writers and assistance had to be done.
Paikide, before we go, Adne, please. Paikide, are you worried that you are not on Naira land and Facebook and Twitter are not owned by OK4?
How is that different? Where we are now, do you own it? Do you own it? I'm asking you. I mean, we are all tainted by it. We are the conquered, so to speak. It is what it is. You know, I give the West credit for saving some of us. I would probably be dead now if I was in Nigeria with all my stupid views, you know? So you've got to give them credit, you know? There is nothing we own, but we own our narrative. And we must make sure that narrative continues to be organic. You know, about writing in his native language and telling that to us in English. Who does that? Tell it to us in your language now. Then let somebody Google the difference. You see, it's complicated. It's just very complicated.
Oh, well, on that note, I want to thank everyone for showing up today. Thank you so much to the audience. Thanks to our panelists. Thank you very much, Paikide, for making yourself available and opening up yourself, and also giving us a dose of your good humor.
Now I'll go back to my work at McDonald's.
please just flip those burgers very carefully.
Yes, exactly. Take it easy.
Yeah, thank you
Bye,
so
guys.
much, everyone. Thank you,
Thanks,
Dr. Five. Thank you, Dr. Verissimo. Thanks, Dr. Yeku. I really appreciate it. And thanks to our online audience, our virtual audience, for being here today. Okay.